Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. If you've ever been on one of my courses before, as you know, the courses are recorded for training purposes and they will always be uploaded onto our Leo YouTube website. So you can always go back and refer to these if you need to as well. In terms of all of the slides, documents, and all of the information that I present to you today, this will all be available to you at a later date this week. It will be emailed out either by Della or potentially Graham as well. We've had a bit of a changeover, so I can't remember who is actually sending this stuff out, but it will be sent to you should you wish to look at this in further detail at a later date as well. So thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon, and we're going to look at adaptive teaching in reading and writing. And within this course, we're going to have a look at how we can best support lower ability SEND children, children with learning difficulties and barriers to learning within the areas of reading and writing. Now, thanks to Amy Carlisle, lots of you were able to give me some kind of ideas on areas that you wanted to support children within as well. So what I've done is I've given you lots of practical general advice. And within this presentation, I've also included some of those elements as well. So hopefully it should touch upon at least some of the things that you're looking for across both of these areas as well. As always, I will pause and stop throughout this presentation. So if there's anything that you have a burning question for or anything that you need to kind of ask along the way, please put it into the chat function. And then what I'll do is when I pause at certain points, I'll kind of answer those as well. And again, I can always go back and I can always re-talk and re-explain anything as well as we go. So adaptive teaching in reading and writing. It's kind of a very wordy title, but if we break it down, I always like to start with a kind of inspirational quote, something to kind of get us motivated and to really think about it. And I think this quote by Ignacio Estrada, it sums up adaptive learning in just literally the best possible way. Because if a child cannot learn the way that we teach, then maybe we should teach the way they learn. And that really sums up adaptive teaching. It's changing the way that we do something so that the child is able to access the learning as best possible for them to suit their needs as well. So adaptive teaching is an educational technique for providing personalised and differentiated learning with the aims to provide efficient, effective and customised learning paths to engage the individual needs of children within a classroom and allowing them to succeed. Not every child is the same, so it's really important that we identify those needs in order to help a child best succeed in education. So in order to successfully adapt both teaching and learning, it's important to first establish the needs of the individual and identify the strategies that work best for them. And a good phrase I always use in teaching is that one size does not fit all, and that one teaching approach is not going to fit and suit every need and learner of your children as well. Now, in terms of identifying strategies, today I'm going to bombard you with lots and lots of strategies. And it's not about going away and trying every single one of these. It's about taking away that golden nugget, that key golden thread that runs through and is best going to support that particular child or that group of learners as well. And practicing it and embedding it consistently in that approach as well. Now, personalising a child's learning can help provide focused attention on an individual, which can be achieved by using carefully tailored questioning, resources and activities in a systematic fashion. And the key there is it has to be done systematically. We cannot try any of these strategies once, and should they not succeed, give up on them and try something new. Because we also have to remember that a learner, especially a low ability learner, sometimes they do struggle, both motivational, they have the anxiety, there are many barriers that they face. So therefore, every day we have to approach in a systematic and consistent approach. And should it not work one day, we must try again over a period of time to embed that skill. Now, not every child is the same. They do not think, act, or learn in the same way. Therefore, we must make a conscious effort to adapt and personalise areas of learning to match the needs of the child so that they feel empowered and confident. And it's a really hard process because you are the class teacher, you are the supporting teacher or the supporting teaching assistant, and it is your duty to ensure that that child is able to make that progress over time as well. So again, it's looking at how you teach, looking at how you run your classroom and organize that to best suit the needs of the child. And one thing I've always learned, and one thing I always remember, is what I have done one year when I've taught is never going to be the same going into the next year. Just because I've done it once and it worked well with that child, It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work again for another child. Every class, every cohort, and every child is different. So again, it's finding those personal strands to support those children where best possible. So a couple of key quick things is remember that it is your duty, and it's really important that before you try any strategy, identify the needs and the barriers of the individual learner that prevent them from being able to access areas of learning. You need to identify that first of all before moving forwards, because that way it will give you a starting point on where to then go forwards next. Establish consistent approaches in the routines, timetabling and strategies. And this is key. When I've had key children before, I've almost given them their own personalised timetable so that they know what they are doing from 9 o'clock when they come in all the way through to 3 o'clock. And it sometimes can be a completely different timetable to that of other children because it is personally tailored to meet their individual needs. Provide clear and measurable learning objectives, instructions, and time and outcomes for the individual to work with as well. Those learning objectives are key. Simple, straight to the point, with clear instructions, taking out the waffle and giving the children the appropriate amount of time. Now, when we talk about time, sometimes it can be short bursts of activities. So rather than spend an hour in an English lesson, you might find that a child just needs a 20-minute English lesson. If you're in a reading lesson, you might find that a child needs longer in that lesson. So again, it's your duty to kind of gauge that reaction and to make that judgment and make that call. You're the teacher, you're the trusted individual, and it's about knowing that child inside out. And then also an approach that I'm a big fan of, and I personally believe it's a really strong strategy to use, is the gradual release model. And it's a teaching model where you teach, first of all, the I-go approach, then you do it together, and you're supporting that child through scaffolded responses before finally letting them go and having a go independently. And that's not a sense of you walking away, but it could be that you're kind of just standing to the side and watching that child so that they can still feel empowered, they still have that confidence, but they are then having a go at doing an activity, doing a task, practicing that skill with that independence, followed by your teaching. So, as you know, you will know your children best. And when we think about the word barriers to learning, there are a myriad of barriers to learning, and I could be here all day writing them down. So this is just a snapshot of some of those barriers. And some of these, you might go, oh, that one I know specifically, or that matches up to my child, or that matches up to a group of children in my class. These are just some of the ideas, but again, it's really important to go away and identify that barrier. If you're a supporting teaching assistant and you're not too sure of your children's barriers to learning, always make sure that you go back to your class teacher and have that conversation, because they will have records, they will have details, and they will have provision maps as well. So make sure that you are privy to seeing that information as well. So if we just go through some of these, they may have difficulties learning by listening, processing and retaining information. It could be a difficulty with being motivated in that task as well. Sometimes it can be a difficulty accessing the actual reading material, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Sometimes children have difficulty actually with their hearing and their eyesight, and actually by identifying that earlier on, the solutions are pretty quick and can be pretty beneficial straight away as well. Difficulty with writing legibly if they have fine motor skills, or again, difficulty if English is not their first language, so if they are EAL. So again, it's identifying those barriers and working their way through. So adaptive teaching, the non-negotiables, and these are things that I would suggest are your golden rules whenever teaching anyone or trying to adapt your learning in some ways. Number one is making sure you have a clear and purposeful learning objective. Do not make it task-driven, make it skill-led of what you wish the child to do. An example of that is saying the learning objective is to write a fact file. For a child of additional needs, that is too broad. Instead, make the learning objective clear and measurable. To include 3 facts. To use 3 noun phrases. To use the conjunctions because, however, and although. And therefore, you're then giving them a measurable goal of what it is you wish for them to achieve in their writing. The next one is giving them clear and succinct steps to success. Now, for me per se, I would say the rule of 3 is enough. 4 if you're feeling ambitious, but those steps to success should be clear and straight to the point. Steps to success for a child to refer back to and then go through logically to know what to do. If a child struggles with being a fluent reader, then using pictures, diagrams to help enable that step to success. Provide children with purposeful outcomes so they know why they're doing this. And then you also need to make sure you're using a consistent and repetitive approach in your teaching. So again, consistently going back and revisiting that skill at all times. Teach, reteach, revisit all areas of that learning and make sure it's done regularly. Just because you did it last week, don't assume that the child has got that skill and won't need to practice it again the following week as well. And that's okay. Children will take longer to embed that skill and that knowledge. I always say have short, sharp, succinct lessons and take out the waffle. Give the children the input, keep it clear and simple, get them to practice, and then move on. And then revisit that later on, whether it's later on in the day or later on that week as well. But those short lessons will keep them motivated and keep them focused on the task at hand. And then again, just reminding you of that I go, we go, and you go approach. So as a teaching timetable, these are just some of the ideas to kind of think about when you're planning your whole class approach. Now, I know that when you've got a class of 30 to 36, it can be really hard when you're trying to support the higher ability. You've got those children who've got English with additional needs, and then you've got children with learning difficulties. Spinning those plates can be incredibly tricky. So I would always suggest having what we call a holding activity. If there is a child or a group of children that specifically aren't going to be able to access the learning off the bat from the beginning of the lesson, provide them with an activity that revisits a previous area of learning that they can do independently, and they probably will go, oh, I can do this. But what it allows them to do is consolidate that learning, practice a skill, and it allows you to teach the wider class. Therefore, when you then release the rest of the class, you can go to those children or that child, and then you can begin their lesson. You can practice their guided group session and start their activity as well. Also, pre-teaching. Preempting areas that children may struggle or find difficult and pre-teach the learning before the lesson as well. This builds up confidence and it builds up prior knowledge in their learning as well. And you can do this the week before, you could do it at the beginning of the week, sometimes even the morning of that learning. And those things could include reading the text ahead, providing the children with the key words and the knowledge of what those words mean, of that vocabulary, and again, revisiting and reviewing that in all senses of the words. Then, when you are going to teach that group of children or that child, introduce the new skill, teach, model, and scaffold, and then gradually release and allow them to practice independently. After that point, revisit, reteach, and review. Now, I should say at this point of the presentation that if you are looking at adapting your teaching for any child in reading and writing, or if you are supporting a child in a classroom, it's really important that you have that work and you have that activities and that tasks before the lesson. And I don't mean just the night before. You need to have time to look at it, to review it, and adapt it for that child. So I always say that it's important that you're given that work at the beginning of the week for the entirety of the week or the week before. And so therefore you might want to start thinking, actually, I need to start planning a week in advance for those children, really thinking about what I want them to do, so that you can really make sure that they are getting that tailored learning for their needs as well. So, quick picture, because now what we're going to think about is the changes that are coming ahead. Now, a child's journey to learning can take many different paths. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through each of the areas: reading, spelling and phonics, and then writing. And I'm going to give you a suggestion of what you can do in each of those areas for how to adapt. Now, there are hundreds of ideas out there, and these are just some of my top ones that I've used previously that I can talk you through and build in any of the suggestions that we might have as well. So, in terms of reading, we need to think that the implications can be far-reaching. Now, this has come from the National Literacy Trust, but because children can't read well, they can't learn independently. So they don't always meet the expectations at school and later on can have trouble accessing the job market and supporting their own children's learning. So realistically, if we do not put the foundations of reading in now, children will struggle later on as well. Now, the barriers to learning in terms of reading, we know that girls tend to perform better than boys. There is an obvious link between poverty and literacy. There can obviously be a lack of reading culture within their homes and a lack of reading books. Now, as I said earlier on, children could also have literacy difficulties such as dyslexia, poor concentration span, insufficient grasp of phonics, problems with eyesight, hearing, or fine motor skills. So we have to take that into consideration when approaching reading lessons. Now, my non-negotiables of reading is, first of all, pre-teach, not reteach. If a child struggles in reading, read the text to them in advance. Find that time where they can read that information, and therefore they're not having that embarrassment of having to have new words exposed to them that they're trying to struggle with on that day. Always read with a child. It's not just about hearing a child read. You are the teacher. You are there to model that skill to them, and that's really important. Dedicate time. If you are expecting a child to make progress, you need to put in that time. And I know it's hard. I know it's hard during the class day when you've got a million things to do, but actually you've got to safeguard that time for those children, because actually those are your most vulnerable. Those are the ones that need it the most as well. Offer and use a range of books that are age appropriate and that will allow them to access their learning at their level. And again, books, magazines, newspapers, comics, graphic novels, there are a range of things out there. So really look and tailor for what that child is going to interest them. And this will also help motivate that learning as much as possible. Ensure you've got a purposeful learning environment, somewhere where they feel safe, that's calm and quiet, that they can come and talk to you and read with you as well. Don't forget to make sure you include lots of pictures and picture prompts. Props are a great way, especially for children who have a lack of cultural capital or awareness of the wider world. Props are a great way to build in that discussion so they then have that understanding when taking it into a reading lesson as well. And then my final non-negotiable is praise, reward, and giving them some kind of incentive as well, because it is a much harder task for them to do than your average child. So therefore, they are going to need a lot more encouragement from you when going forward as well. So text selection in all of our schools across Leo Academy, obviously there is a wide range of books available, whether it's Oxford Owl, Big Collins, Project X, Bug Club, or the one I wanted to talk to you today was Little Gems. And if you haven't got these in your school, it's worth talking to your inclusion team or your DSL at some point, because Little Gems, the Barrington book clubs, these are books specifically designed for dyslexia readers as well, because the text inside has been printed on specially coloured paper. Again, I don't know if you can see, because this is a very tinted yellow as well. And the text is actually written in a particular font as well to allow children an ease of reading as well. So have a look out for those. They're Little Gems Barrington books as well. The other one I wanted to have a look at is the Usborne books as well. These are absolutely great. I'm addicted to these as well. And they come in various levels, and they actually cover lots of the traditional stories and traditional fairy tales as well. So they're really nice for children to kind of read along as well. And they're at varying levels. So again, they allow children to feel confident and not expose their lack of ability to other children as well. So again, go back to your reading, have a look and make sure those children have appropriate text selection at all times as well. When you're reading with a child, don't be afraid to read that book once and then revisit it as well, because actually what you're doing to that child is you're building in that confidence to revisit tricky words and have a chance to have a go at again at a later date as well. And say that to them. We're going to reread this text next week, and I'm going to read it to you again the other week. And that way they know, they're like, right, okay, well, I've read it once, I'm building up that familiarity, and you're exposing them to those common frequency words at a high rate as well. And for children that do struggle, whether it is dyslexia or they have hearing or they have eyesight issues as well, coloured overlay strips, changing the colour of the pages are really, really important as well. Remember that not every colour is the same for every child. Also, reading rulers are fantastic because, again, they allow the child to focus on the sentence at the time. Finger pointers and sentence guides are a great tool and tip as well. If you're struggling, you're thinking, I can't get these resources, lots of these I've actually made myself as well. So, for example, the reading ruler, that's really just simple, just a piece of card. And the sentence hiding strips, that was just cutting out the middle as well. So these things you can kind of make and adapt as well. This one down here just with a popsicle stick as well and a picture on there, so you can kind of skim and scan around the page. Especially for those EYFS and year one, if you're focusing on a picture and you want the child to move around the picture while skimming and scanning and looking at a particular part, that allows them to really kind of narrow down what they're seeing as their viewfinder as well. The other thing, the next one is starting with a picture prompt to begin with, using a range of pictures, drawings, and diagrams, and allowing that to open up the discussion before moving into the text. Then introducing the key vocabulary and exposing children to that vocabulary. So again, we've moved from the picture, we've looked at it, we've discussed it. What can you see? Now I'm going to introduce the vocabulary. We're going to practice saying those words, understanding its word meaning, and then introducing children to the text as well. So therefore, they've had that three-way process before they've even looked at a text as well. The variety of texts, again, think about how you want to vary those as well. They don't always have to be a standalone page of text. Sometimes they can be fun fact files. Sometimes they could be smaller top trump cards. So again, varying how you expose children to those pages. And then finally, cutting up and chunking the text. So you're not giving children a whole page, which can be quite daunting, by actually giving them smaller snippets. And once they've read that, talked about it, understood, then giving them the next part as well, you're giving them that chance to focus on their ability at their pace as well. Because actually, if they struggle with the first part, there's no point moving on. You might as well just stick with that first part of the text and develop that understanding in that sense as well. So this is something that, again, that I've tried, and it's highlighting the text and ensuring children have chunking of that text as well. So again, make sure it's age appropriate and its ability accessible. You can either highlight tricky words that you know they're going to struggle with. So you're preempting that and saying, these are the words I want you to try. Shortening the amount of text. What you could do is you can also rewrite the text as well. And I know that's time consuming, so it's not always going to be possible for you to do that every single time. But sometimes by rewriting a text, it allows you to omit unnecessary words. And it also can allow you to replace them with spelling words, with statutory spelling words, or with phonics sounds that you wish children to practice with as well. And again, that's an idea of simplifying where possible. Now, what I've done from when I've taught in years 3 all the way to 6 is I've trained the children to highlight the words that they are confident readers. So if I'm reading with a child or they're reading with my adults in the room, then the adult or myself will highlight every word that a child can read. And if we come to a tricky word, we highlight that in orange, because then that means that later on in that day or later on in that week, I know which words I need to revisit, I need to reteach, I need to go back and talk to that child about as well. It also allows me to say, right, when I'm modeling in front of the class, I'm going to make sure I use those words as much as possible to expose them to that familiarity as well. So it's a great way to aid with phonics, spelling, and to ensure children's fluency and pace improves as well. The next one is a really fun one, and it's basically chunking up the text into fun fact cards, post-it notes, and paragraphs. Not every child of a low ability or of an additional need needs to be able to read a page of text. So actually simplifying that text down to the key facts or key vocabulary and giving it to them in fun ways. It could be by writing them down on post-it notes, which again, they have to organize, they have to read. It's kinesthetic, so again, they can pick them up and choose which ones they want to read at their own pace. Fact files are a great one because, again, they give you the key information, the key vocabulary, and they omit and take out any of the waffle or unnecessary words as well. Or fun fact strips as well. And these are really lovely because what they do is they give children just the information that they need, and they take out any of the unnecessary word. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to give it to them at their pace as well. In terms of games and activities, children can pair and share, read them together, domino matching up which ones go together. They could also do the Diamond 9, where they have 9 post-it cards or fun facts, and they've got to organize them from the most important fun fact right down to the least important. So again, it shows you their comprehension and their understanding. What you could also ask them to do is eliminate all the unnecessary words and see if they can identify just the key vocabulary that they need to require as well. And then our next one is ordering activities, which is a really fun activity. And as you can see, this is a picture of an example of something that I've done in my classroom as well. I've taken the basic story and I've turned it into a very simple sentence. Each one has a sentence on each of the cards, and each of the words was of a spelling word or a phonic rule was of a spelling rule or a phonic word that I was teaching that week as well. Now, it's very small, so you might not notice it here, but in the picture, any word that was topic specific, I changed the color because I didn't need a child to be able to read that word straight away. And in this instance, it was the name of a character. So that child, I would have just pre-told that word before going into this. Now, ordering activities is quite fun because, again, it develops high-frequency vocabulary. It's a repetitive use of phonics sounds, and it allows to build familiarity. It's also quite nice because you can use it to match up with pictures, images, and widgets, and it helps reinforce those key ideas and vocabulary on the way. Because it's quite kinesthetic, children can move them around, they can change them up, they can think and talk and discuss about those key symbols and signs when ordering those activities as well. What you can then do is you could remove the text. Can the children organize it with the pictures? And then do it in reverse. Remove the pictures. Can you now order it with the text? And that is a really good activity because that is the reading skill that they need to do in that lesson. One thing that teachers always ask me is, once they've done this, do I then still need to ask the children questions? Do they need to complete comprehension questions? No, because that is their activity. You've got that evidence. For their learning objective is to order sentences, to order and read, keeping it clear and simple and purposeful for those points as well. And then my final point with reading is, don't forget your sound buttons, because they are really good to do both on individual words, especially if you're introducing new vocabulary that you know is going to come up. Sentence strips, which are really lovely because, again, you can write those sentences out. Children can practice writing those sentences out, reading them together. Changing the font and the size of the font is really important because actually it can allow a child to be able to see words more clearly as well. Really think about when you're printing work off, if that work is really small and a child is initially going to struggle anyway, that's going to make it much more trickier for them as well. So really changing that up can allow it to become more engaging along the way. And then also cutting things up, moving sentences around, reading them in and out of order, it allows them to kind of go in a different flow along with their writing. So those are just a couple of ideas in terms of the reading activities of what you can do to help adapt that teaching in that way as well. So just going to jump on while I take a sip of water. Any questions on the reading part, again, please feel free to drop them into the chat. If not, please don't worry. You can always email me at the end again, and I can always respond back in that way as well. So moving on to phonics and spellings. Now I've grouped these together, and what I've tried to do in terms of adapt the teaching is make the activities as universal as possible, because obviously I'm aware we've got EYFS year 1 all the way up to year 6 as well. And again, these techniques and these tools, they are easily adaptable. The first one is a phonics organizer as well. Again, getting some bowls, baskets, getting some trays, putting the phonics sound or the spelling rule, and then asking children to organize objects or pictures into those phonics. And again, they get a chance to practice. They have to say the sound. Which one do they think it's going to go in? It allows them to build up that familiarity. It's kinesthetic, and this can be quite a nice independent holding activity whilst you're teaching a group or teaching a class as well. It's also quite a fun activity to do in small groups as well, because you can take those turns and that movement around. Another one which I have seen work really well in a couple of our infant schools is using a bit of I Spy with picture prompts. And again, it doesn't just have to be picture prompts. It could be with pictures, photographs, or even actual objects. And what you're getting children to do is go, right, I Spy, and today we're going to look at the ch sound, or we're going to look at the sound. I have to remind myself of my phonics there. And then what we're doing is we're looking at a picture, and where can you see those sounds? Where can you spot those sounds as well? So again, it's allowing them to practice that and practice those in different ways. The other one you can do, again, for your spelling rules, is you could introduce that spelling rule and seeing how many they can spot in that picture as well. The other types of phonic games you can do is getting some card, getting some post-it notes, large post-it notes, putting them on the floor and asking children to jump between the letters. Again, it's getting them up, it's getting them active, it's getting them part of the routine as much as possible as well. And again, you could almost get them to jump to the phonic sound. You say the word, what is the phonics sound that you can hear? What sounds can you hear? Can you jump on those cards? Can you spell it out as well? So again, it's that kinesthetic movement. The other one is identifying missing letters and missing phonics sounds, removing the sounds and asking them to put them in as well. Now, when I've done this previously, I've limited the number of sounds that I want to focus on as well, because otherwise it can be too much for a child. And I've given them those sounds to start off with, and then slowly starting to remove them one at a time as well. So again, to develop that independence. And then one of my favorites is the Venn diagram, the sorting circles as well. Again, you can choose 2 Venn diagrams or 3, introduce 3 different sounds, allow them to move objects around, move bits and pieces. And I would always say that this doesn't have to be an expensive resource as well. I don't rarely buy things. I normally just make them, cut up pieces of paper, draw, write words, cut off images and bits and pieces. And again, it's giving them that opportunity as well, especially if you're going to revisit and review these over several times as well. Another kind of quick kind of activities is sorting sounds into tables as well. So again, choosing your sounds, giving them pictures, and they have to organize what those pictures or sounds could be as well. This can be both paired and it can be both independent. Again, if you want to reconsolidate a sound or you want to check whether a child has understood that sound, again, you could give this as an after activity to see if what they can remember. Again, it's also quite a nice morning activity when they come in. It's there for them to do. They can pick it up and they can start practicing those sounds before going into that lesson as well. Phonics spelling and sound bingo is a nice one to do as well. What sounds can you hear? The one thing I would say with this is, again, just limit the number of phonics sounds that you want to introduce. If you try to do all of them, it can be quite confusing and overwhelming for those children. And then phonics spelling board games. Roll the dice, land on it, and you can adapt this in many ways. The one on the screen that I'm showing you, that's a very complicated one, but you can do simplified versions of that along the way as well. And then I know from growing up, long time ago, don't forget some of the other good games as well, like Hangman is a really good way of doing that. Word searches and crosswords are a really great way to introduce those sounds and get you to practice those rules along the way. So when you are looking at new vocabulary and you're introducing new words to children, what you can do is you can do some kind of vocabulary organizers. Now, the first one is a really nice way because actually what you're doing is you're setting up a bank of questions that children can use and apply when looking at words. So, for example, where did we find this word? Is it a short, medium, or long word? So again, they're having to look at the length of the word, get them to count the letters, get them to identify, are there any words that we can already see within the words? Could we color those words in, circle them? Could we cut them up and again, make it kinesthetic? What kind of category is this word? So again, you're getting them to think about their word classes as well. Is there any part they already know? Can they identify any of the sounds? Can they draw that word? So again, you're just exploring different ways for them to practice new phonics and new spellings. This is another example of a phonic organizer and a spelling organizer, and you're giving them children different boxes that they have to write and complete as well. This is a really lovely one, especially when you're introducing topic vocabulary, because actually that could be the activity for children enough as it is. It's just finding out the meaning of the word and then drawing their understanding of that word. Do you actually understand what that word means? Can you show me through drawing as well? For those who are a little bit older and higher up in the school, creating almost like spelling dictionaries, spelling rules, spelling grids, trying to find alternate synonyms, alternate antonyms, and really building up that vocabulary for them to practice as well. So as we move into writing and we look at the learning objectives and activities, at this point, I would say that writing is really dependent on your reading. One thing I've always stressed previously is that if you tailor the reading specifically to that child and you make sure that the reading is appropriate to that child, the writing task should almost link. Take what they've read, take the vocabulary that you've introduced, take the spellings that you've embedded or the phonic knowledge, and then apply that to the writing task. And if you make the writing task something separate, something brand new, then you're almost having to double your work as well. An example of this is I've got a child here And it's going to be a bit hard, so I'm just going to stop presenting the screen for a second. So this is a child that I had taught a couple of years ago. And what we had done was we had read a text together and we'd widgeted that text and he had it in various strips along the way. So again, the vocabulary was pre-taught, it was pre-exposed. Then from that lesson, we then had some word that we had to organize. We had to put those words and discuss them, cut them up. We kind of did matching activities. We paired them up. And we did that over the space of an entire week. Really built up the vocabulary. Then what we did was we took the words away. We just had the pictures. And then he had to practice spelling those words. Which one could he remember? Where would they go? So again, we're now building on that activity of the reading. He's still having to read, still having to apply his phonic knowledge and his spelling knowledge. And then finally, we then moved into our story writing. This time we used the same pictures, the same words, and we did our S-map. So again, it gave them that time to re-embed, revisit, and review. And then finally, the child then wrote their story and wrote their piece of work as well. And that is a combination of all of the reading lessons of that week, all of the spelling and phonic lessons of that week, and the writing lessons. So their task was different to that of the rest of the class as well. But again, it was that systematic approach to what we wanted the outcome to be as well. So if we go back, that should give a little bit of idea to the purpose of this. So in terms of learning tasks, make sure they're real tasks for real audiences as well. And something that you might want to use is what's called the TAP approach. Okay, the TAP is an acronym and it stands for text type, audience, and purpose. So what is the text type you want the children to do? For example, a letter. Who's the audience? Let's say it's for a head teacher. And what's the purpose? It's to persuade. Again, it's simple, straight to the point, and concise. You also want to make sure you give children exemplar pieces to refer to as well. Waggles, modelled examples, pieces that have been written that they can refer to and see what it should look like as well. Just because a child is higher up in the school, you shouldn't really assume that they would know how to write a letter. For some, they may never have seen a letter or received a letter. So again, giving them those actual examples so they can see what it looks like. Something that I've tried this year and last year is getting children to actually draw out what they think a letter or what a diary entry or what a newspaper should look like. Quick sketches allows them to actually think about what they should be doing and organising their ideas. A good tip is to print this out the week before. So again, any modelled pieces you're doing with the children, print it out and go with them in the week in advance, because then again, you're kind of preempting and pre-teaching what is coming up in the following week as well. And again, you can do that on the Friday afternoons, in the afternoons, just grabbing them. Sometimes I even give these to parents and say, look, this is what we're doing next week. If you get a chance to read it through with the children, just so they are going into that week with that prior knowledge and confidence as well. So as you saw in one of my books as well, visual maps and stimuli are really important. So visual prompts, they can help people generate ideas, they can support vocabulary and ideas, and they're really also good to include on various writing frames, postcards, or worksheets. Now, Pi Corbett is very well known for doing his S-maps and story maps. And if you literally type that into Google, you will be seeing lots of different examples. You do not have to be the best artist in the world to do an S-map. So that's one of the most common fears and conceptions of, oh, it's going to look rubbish. Sometimes the best story maps are the most simple pictures and simple approaches. If you try to overcomplicate it, it loses the focus. If you're really worried about doing S-maps, print off pictures. And that's, again, it's a time saver. And then again, it's that organizing. You're putting them along the map for children to be able to retell orally. And again, if a child can talk to you and say that story, they become greater than at writing that story as well. What you can then do is include your key vocabulary, key words, and your key learning that you wish to induce for that week. Sequencing activities can also be literally what came first, what came next, what came last. Great for instructional writing, but also really good for recounts. And again, keeping it clear to what you wish children to do. They encourage children to think deeper and help weaker writers to organize their ideas. Your strips can contain keywords, phrases, or whole sentences. They can either be expanded into full answers or stuck down to aid with handwriting as well. And again, this doesn't have to be anything fancy. Post-it notes, coloured card, coloured pieces of paper, all of those can be great ways to kind of organise and to kinesthetically move around the board as well. These are really lovely to kind of get the children to then plan their own stories, plan their own writing, because they can visually refer back to what is going on in the pictures along the way as well. So these are just other examples of sequencing activities. You've got the jigsaw puzzle pieces, which work really nicely because, again, it allows children to piece them together. You'll notice that each of the words are color-coded as well, and that comes from something called colorful semantics, and that's where you're giving each of the each of the word classes a particular color so that children can consistently refer back to that. Be careful if you decide to ever go down the colorful semantic and the color route for word classes. The reason I say be careful is that if you change your mind halfway through the year, it can be confusing. So if you're going to have, for example, nouns as the color red and adjectives as the color blue, then you need to make sure that is embedded throughout the whole year so the child can consistently refer to that. Secondly, the other reason why it can be tricky is if you're as a whole school are not using that approach, then when a child leaves your class and goes to the following year group, sometimes that can be a bit confusing if they don't have that approach. So again, just think about how you might use that in some ways. Organising sentences through your post-it notes are a really lovely way for children to understand whether their sentences are correct. And again, they can write each of the words down, they can reorder, and then work out what is missing next. Putting post-it notes when you're doing your character descriptions is a really good way. They don't have to transfer those ideas as well. And then also when you're doing those story maps, if you wanted them to create your own and they struggle with organizing their ideas, then actually by putting them on post-it notes, they can take them off and move them around should they wish to add anything in or actually change the order of their story. And then this is a great picture because I love it, is this can take place anywhere in your classroom. It doesn't have to take place on a table. If you've got a space in your room, whether it be a door, whether it be a window, get the children standing up, get the children doing something, get them moving around as well. Because again, sometimes they need those movement breaks as well. They need to be able to stand up and do those things as well. So vocabulary when writing. Introducing vocabulary is clear, and it's really important to pre-select and choose the vocabulary that you wish children to use as well. So again, pre-teaching that. One thing is really nice is using the 1, 2, 3 approach as well. And again, it can be done over weeks or it can be done over days. But what you're doing is introducing the simple vocabulary, or I should say kind of the fundamental common vocabulary, and then you're building it up into more trickier, difficult versions. So for example, today we're going to use the word small, introducing the word then petite, and then moving it on to minuscule. Now, again, you will have to adapt and you will have to understand whether your child is able to do that. You might just get to point 2. Some of your children might just be on point 1 as well. But again, it's nice to then start to introduce and expand their vocabulary in simple steps. And these words, by pre-teaching them and pre-selecting, you can then consistently model that in everything that you do as well. Bookmarks are really nice to include in their books. And every time that they are introducing new vocabulary, or you notice that they've got a spelling or phonic word they struggle with, you can add it to their bookmark so that when they move that from the page to page, they can refer back to that personalized bookmark and they know what they are learning from as well. And then there's an example of that colorful semantic. But again, as I said, just be wary that if it's not embedded and it's not consistent, it can be quite confusing as well. Question. Hi, Paula.
Just to say, Chris, the other thing that I do with the younger children is put the word on the next page so that when they come to do the next piece of work, say like with the word that they've done wrong, and then I'll talk that through and I'll say, look, I'll pop it up here and it's big then at the top of the page. So whenever they turn then to do their next piece of work, that's there ready as a reminder for them. And sometimes I do that with letter shapes as well for the younger ones.
Perfect. And actually, I know Cheamput Farm, I don't know if they still do it, but they have what's called like a next step post-it note that goes from EYFS all to year 6. And that's a very similar approach, is that post-it note has that writing target, or it has the keyword that the child struggles with, or it has the phonics sound or the letter formation. And then that post-it note can be moved from page to page until that child is confident, and then replaced with the next one as well. So that's a really nice technique to help children understand what their next step should be in their writing as well. In terms of the final ones as well, is giving children what I call ingredients cards, which is quite nice. And this works in a lovely way, because what it does is it just gives children kind of like instructions, almost like steps to success of what they need to include. Don't forget to include your capital letters, don't forget to include an adverb, etc. And you can simplify these to however you need to do it. So again, that can be tailored from anywhere from an EYFS up to a year 6 on how many instructions. Just bear in mind, you don't want to overload them with too many instructions as well. I've mentioned widgets quite a lot, and if you're unfamiliar with widgets, it's worth talking to your inclusion team as well, because they should have an account, and they're fantastic resources for putting pictures and words together. A story writing toolbox, again, you can build that with your children, and then obviously whiteboards. Brilliant. And they can work in so many ways. They're so versatile. In this picture, you can just see this is a checklist of all the things that a child had to do. So again, it was that going backwards and forwards of ideas as well. And then final thoughts, because again, I've probably given you so much already, is reduce the word count. Sometimes a child can struggle with how much they want to write. And actually, if you say to them, all I want you to write today is 5 lines, or I actually want you to write 1 paragraph, or I only want you to use X amount of words, it actually allows them to be more succinct in what they need to do. So again, reduce that word count, and then you can increase it slowly to build stamina as well. The use of ICT, I haven't really focused as much on ICT, but I just think that we've had a lot of ICT recently. So again, if you want to kind of message me, I can talk to you about that as well. But there are lots of things that you could do, things like sound buttons, things like voice recorders, things like the read and write and the mote are really good, because they can obviously, you can record yourself and a child can listen to that as well. Don't forget to do drawings alongside your stories and your writing and your reading, because again, that allows a child to visualize and to understand what they're actually doing as well. And also using a variety of colored pens, because actually, again, the visual and the kinesthetic for those children, it allows them to really play along with that as well. Reread their work. Give them a purpose and allow them to reread it, and not just reread it in their head. Reread to another child, reread to another adult, because what they're actually doing is they're checking their work along the way. And usually 9 times out of 10, by hearing it, they will be able to kind of identify and spot those mistakes along the way. And then finally, praise. And I'm because it's really important that we are giving as much praise as possible. They will struggle. So again, you want to motivate them as much as possible and build up that can-do attitude along the way as well. So those are just a couple of suggestions and ideas on how to kind of support children adapt in reading, writing, spellings, and phonics. I hope that it has been helpful in some ways and just given you some food for thought as well. This is the time for you. If you do feel you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat function. If not, thank you very much for listening this afternoon. All of this will be emailed out to you and put up onto our Leo YouTube channel. So thank you very much, and I hope you've had a very informative afternoon as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Bye.